moving on. All right, so we're not really shipping out a retro edition of RTA, but I was actually very proud of the fact that I ran this last week, was able to get a text version of RTA still running. Had to go find an old 32-bit machine to boot up to do it, but it still did it. But I wanted to kind of go through that because it celebrates a little bit about the history, where we came from, what we did, and a lot of you were part of that history. 18 months ago, I bought the company, and RTA officially became a third-generation family business, which is really quite an achievement by itself, and it testifies a little bit to the legacy that my dad left and that my grandfather left, because truthfully, only 15% of companies ever reach this point. This year, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary. You guys all wore the gray shirts last night, and I want you to know how much that meant to me to see you celebrating with us 40 years of RTA. Especially because only 17% of companies get to this point. Most companies fail within the first 5 years of being brought into existence. The rest, almost all of them, fail at 10 years. Very few of them ever hit 40, even fewer are going to hit 50. Even fewer are going to hit 100. So as I look forward, I'm looking forward to how do we get to the next 40? How do we get to that 100 mark? It's pretty incredible, that we've been able to hit this. And I really want to just, state why that is. It's because of you. And so thank you for everybody who's here and not here. Because none of this exists without you, without our clients telling us how to do things, supporting us, buying into the product, buying into what we're doing here. None of it exists without you. You are the reason we're here, both financially and both just our purpose. It's because of you that we have jobs. It's because of you that we do our jobs. And I distinguish between those two because I think they're both do very different things. It really is because of you that we're here, and that's the why. We talked about that on Wednesday. We start with our why. Why are we here? Is because we're here to help. And this is how we've been able to do it, and we want to thank you for that support. All right, so what can we learn? Looking over these last 40 years, I started thinking about, what are some of the lessons that we've learned as a company? What are some of the lessons that I've been able to take away, that I can look at the lives of my predecessors? How do we apply some of those lessons to your jobs? How do you guys take those away? How do you understand those? So I want to kind of go through this last keynote, was talk through some of the life lessons that I've learned from Grandpa, that I've learned from Dad, and life lessons that I've learned from myself. Are we okay back there? Something's dying, and I don't know what's happening. My retro edition broke it, I think. What happened? Right? Anyway, so life lessons that we can learn from Ron, Larry, and myself. Mostly, I want to take away the positive things that I learned from my grandfather and my father. And then since I've only been in this position for 18 months, there's not a lot of life lessons. What there is a lot of life mistakes. And so I'm going to share some of those and what we can learn from my mistakes. So lesson number one that I took from both my dad and my grandfather was be good at what you do. Be good at what you do. When I looked at what Grandpa was able to do over the years, a lot of people probably know his story. I'll share it briefly. Is that he started at UPS as a driver in 1961. My dad had just been born. They just relocated to Phoenix. And he saw an ad in the newspaper for UPS drivers wanted. And so he went out and applied for that job, got a job driving around the Casa Grande area of Phoenix, pretty much from modern-day Chandler down through Casa Grande. And he had an 8-hour route that he was assigned to drive. Right? They load him up with packages, and he'd go drive this 8-hour route. But 8 hours wasn't good enough for Grandpa. No, he had to do it in 6. And so he made it his mission to make that process so efficient that he could get home in 6 hours. And he did. And he did it quickly. And he got some people's attention. And so then he started teaching other people, and he had a method, that you go, you grab the box, you turn in one step, and step towards the car. You got, the old method, you see, where do the UPS drivers keep the keys? In their hands, right? It never leaves. And so it's just as easy as getting in, getting out. They have it down to a science because they've traced every misstep and how long that adds up for every delivered package. And Grandpa was the one who started that process. In fact, people hate him to this day. If you talk to some of the old school UPS drivers, I remember that guy. 15 steps to the door, and so then he moved up the ranks. He took over UPS's fleet services through several different moves throughout the years. In 1974, he takes over 48 million pieces of equipment, not million, 48,000 pieces of equipment, running basically what was one of the largest fleets in the world at that time, but was over UPS's North America and European operations. And it was in that time that he did his famous time study where he followed the mechanic doing the wrench turning on an engine replacement. They used to rebuild their engines overnight, and they had 12 hours to get that engine rebuild done, and they did it often. They were running these vehicles pretty hard, and so they'd rebuild those engines frequently. He took a 12-hour job, and as they watched this mechanic, he looked at all the inefficiencies. Steve showed that diagram this morning of the steps that their technicians were taking. That was exactly what Grandpa did back in the 70s. It's still relevant today because it's about process. And so they watched this technician as he was sweating with effort. He was working so hard, and yet it still took him 12 hours to do things because he made 6 trips to the part room. Because by the time he got back, somebody took his air hose, somebody took his tool. Jan talked about how they weren't allowed to use impact wrenches. And yet Cummins was using impact wrenches on the engines to build them, but UPS couldn't use them to rebuild them. And so he got the right tool, the right place. He simplified the process, had them stage parts before the mechanic would take the parts, and got that process down from 12 hours to 6. And then he took it, he says, we could have gotten another 2, but they decided to stop there. And then they went and did that process throughout all of their repairs at UPS. And that's how he has his claim to fame, that he saved UPS $100 million. Maybe not directly. It was a lot of money directly, but they also were able to expand their fleet, and they didn't have to increase the number of technicians. That vehicle equivalency ratio that we talked about this morning, he was able to expand that without increasing the workload on the technicians. And so through doing that, he was able to save UPS $100 million. Do you think he was good at his job? He made it his mission to drive efficiency. That was his personal mission. His personal why was that he wanted to be the most efficient person in the world. He did it as a driver. He did it as a technician. What he did changed. Why he did not. Right? Talk about my dad. He was one of the leading developers in the early days of RTA. In fact, when he bought the company in 1985, he moved it out of my grandfather's garage and into his. And he became employee 1. He was the only employee at the company. He let go of the other 2 developers. Grandpa got out of the business, got into consulting, and Dad pretty much started over with the name only and the code they had already written to that point, which wasn't much. It's 3 years in. He took a lot of the code that they'd started, used another program to help fund the development of RTA in those early days, because RTA was a long sales process. It was a long cash flow. And so they would work on this other product in the morning, work on RTA at night, and through that, until the RTA engine could start running on its own, they probably got through the first, I want to say, 3 to 4 years they were running that way, until they could let go of the other product and just start focusing on RTA. And what those screens you were seeing was a lot of what he developed in those early days, because that was how he was developing. As RTA would eventually grow and become the GUI version that you guys all know and use today, he was one of the lead architects of RTA. So every time there's a new project coming up, if we look at shop scheduler, paperless inspections, pretty much the new products that we developed in the last 15 years before he passed away, that had his thumbprints all over it. He designed them, he drew the screens out. I dare say he even might have coded a little bit of them, but he was all over that. Do you think he was good at what he did? He understood what he was doing, and for 30 years, he was still actively involved in the development of the software. Right? The other thing that he was very good at was that he listened. He was very good at incorporating feedback. The reason why the software is as good as it is today, I mentioned that we only do this because of you. He was good at listening to everyone, getting the feedback he needed to drive the product, to drive it where it needed to be. Right? He was good at incorporating that feedback because for him, it was all about serving the client. It was all about service. Finding some way that he could serve and make a difference for people. So I'd ask you is, what skills do you need to improve on? What do you need to get good at your job? What do you need to have that Ron Turley-like focus on efficiency, that Larry Turley-like focus on quality and serving? What skills do you need to improve on? Are you the best at what you can do? Can you become the best? There's a book, Jim Collins talks about this hedgehog principle. You don't have to be good at everything, but if you could be good at one good thing, be good at that one big thing. Be the best at that one thing. Be the hedgehog in your job. All right? Are you investing in yourself to get there? You're here, so the answer is yes. Right? What other conferences are you going to? What other books are you reading? What other industry sources are you learning about? Are you spending time investing in yourself? Right? Are you investing in yourself to get better in any way? And then are you being disciplined in your efforts? We talked today about being so busy that we're busier today than we've ever been in the past. And I think everybody agrees with that sentiment, right? Is that there is no time for anything. Talking to somebody at lunch, we talked about how you have to make the time. What do we mean by make time? You can't make time. You have to be intentional. That's a very purposeful word. You have to be intentional with your time. You have to intentionally set aside where that time's going and make sure that you're setting aside time for yourself. You have to intentionally make time for yourself and intentionally make time for the things that matter most. Your family, your growth, your job, and intentionally make sure that you've got that prioritized around your why. Right? This is not easy to do to become really good in your industry. It's not easy to do to become the best at what you need to do. But it establishes the credibility you need and establishes yourself in being able to achieve your mission. All right. The next lesson I learned, going back to Grandpa's story, was that efficiency matters. Right? It was all about simplifying the processes. Right? We talked about reducing the repeated work. That mechanic didn't need to go back and forth 6 times. He only needed to go once. Right? He needed to have the right tool, the right place, at the right time. Right? We took that 12-hour engine job, took it down to 6 hours, and that's how he saved us $100 million at UPS. What can you do? Right? You look in your shops, you know where there's efficiencies, or inefficiencies, I should say. What can you do differently? What simple thing, if you just remove that step or change that step, how much could you save? Right? You might not be able to save $100 million because you might be managing a fleet of 400 instead of 48,000. But instead of 100 million, maybe you could save 10,000. Maybe you start there. What can you do? Right? In one of Fred's classes, he talks about time management. We're only given 40 minutes in a day. Right? That's currency that can't be saved. It has to be spent. Right? How are we spending our time? Are we spending that on ourselves, or are we spending it on things that don't matter? What are some things that we waste our time with? And what do we do with those? 3 Ds that we talk about, we can either delegate, we can delete them, or we do them. Right? Are there processes that you could simplify? Could you simplify your own process? Maybe you simplify your own end-of-period process. Maybe you're still doing manual fuel entry. Simplify the process of importing your fuel records. Oftentimes, it's not an effort problem. We all know that you guys work hard. We all know that some of your people work hard. Some of them don't, but that's a different discussion, right? But for those who it's not an effort problem, it's usually a process problem. How do we simplify that process so that we can make the most of our time, that we can spend it wisely? Right. The last thing that I got really a lot from my father was this idea of servant leadership. And being a servant leader, a lot of times people think, you want me to what? Being a servant leader is not about being subservient. Right? It's about putting other people ahead of yourself. It's about serving their needs while also serving the needs of the mission, serving the needs of the company, the organization. It's not about being subservient. It's about serving the needs of others. Right? Something else that we look at was love those you lead. I think my dad exemplified this more than any person I ever known in the history of leaders that I've studied. He was one of the best ones at this. He loved those he led. Right? You can talk to anybody who ever worked for Dad. You can talk to any of the people who've been here a long time. They'll testify to that fact. Any of you who met him probably know that. You've seen him. You know what he was like. Some of the things they say, Larry was the best boss that I ever worked for. He was one of the greatest men I ever knew. It's something that people tell me all the time. He was kind, he was caring, he was compassionate, and most of all, he was forgiving. He would forgive you for anything. And he forgave a lot of people for stuff they didn't deserve being forgiven for, but he still did it because that's what he believed in. There's a story that Jan's given me permission to share. And I've got to be able to make it through this story, so I might rush through it a little bit. But there was a time when RTA was first starting off. This is going to be in the early 90s, about 94, 95. And Jan, Dad, and Richard, those of you who remember him, had all gone up to Comdex. And at Comdex, they decided that, in order to save money, because money was tight back then, they would all share a hotel room. Right? My guys are thanking me that I don't do that anymore. But that was the kind of crew that they were. They did what it took to get the job done. They shared a hotel room, and the three of them were in this hotel room. And come about 1 o'clock at night, the phone rings. Dad answers the phone, hangs up, wakes up Jan, says, Jan, you need to call your family. Jan calls and finds out that his wife's mom has passed away. After talking it over amongst the three of them, Dad looks at him and says, Jan, you need to fly home. And I'll pay for that ticket. So he flew Jan home from Las Vegas immediately to be with his wife. And then he flew him and his family up to Salt Lake to be there for the funeral. Money was tight. They were sharing a room to save on money. But he knew when he needed to spend it. And he knew that Jan was in need, and he flew him and his entire family up there for that funeral. He loved those that he led. He cared about them, and he knew when it mattered most. I can tell you is that I've been in this situation, and I'm not half that person. I'm probably right about half that person, if I'm honest. Because I have done things for other people, but I've not done that. I'm not that generous. Love those you lead. He was a terrific example of that. Right. Some of the lessons that I've been able to pick up, the people you lead, do you know their families' names? Do you know who matters to them? Because they should matter to you. Do you know what their dreams are? Do you know what they want to do with their life? Because that should matter to you. Do you let them know how much they mean to you? Do you talk to them and tell them how much that you appreciate their efforts? Even if their processes are flawed, do you appreciate their efforts? Because their efforts should matter to you. Right. Are you mentoring them? Are you helping them in their journey? Because I know we've all had people who have helped us in our journeys. Are you repaying that back? Are you paying that forward? And are you helping them in their journey? Because their journey should matter to you. Right. That's what it means to love those who you lead. Right. Can you tell when you walk into the office and they're having a bad day? Do you know them well enough that you can read those signs? And then when you do, what do you do about it? Right? Because their bad day should matter to you. Last thing I have here is do you do anything for them? One of the things that we try to do at RTA is celebrate things, little things, like birthdays. It's not much. In fact, it's probably not enough. But it's something that we try to do just to let them know that we care and that we're paying attention. We try to recognize people. Are you doing anything specifically to help recognize the people and recognize their efforts? Are you calling attention to them for the little things that they do in their lives? Other things that you can do weekly one-on-ones. How many people do weekly one-on-ones with their direct reports? Where you meet with them weekly and you talk to them about how their job's going. Right? How many people are doing that right now? Okay, how many people take that one-on-one opportunity and then not only ask them how their job's going, but how things are going at home? How are things going with their kids? How are things going with their spouse? How are things going with their dog? Right? How are things going with their parents? Do you know what's going on at home? Are you keeping an eye on that? Because I will tell you is that we talk about work-life balance. Jeff Bezos says it best. He says it's not work-life balance. It's not a teeter-totter. You don't trade one for the other. It's work-life harmony. It's a cycle. What affects one is going to affect the other without question. If he had a bad day at work, he's going to have a bad day at home. If things aren't right at home, things aren't going to be right at work. Right? Recognition, you can't do enough of this. You cannot do enough recognition. You cannot recognize people's efforts enough. If you think you're not doing enough in recognition, you're right. Right? You can always do more, and it will always be appreciated. And especially, we talk about the millennial generation and all their flaws. One thing they crave more than anything else, more than pay itself, recognition. Recognize the efforts, recognize the results, and pat them on the back. They like to know that they're making a difference and that you see it. Right. C.S. Lewis says that experience, that most brutal, not beautiful, it's brutal. Experience is that most brutal of teachers, but you learn. My God, do you learn. Right. One of the books that we handed out is this book called The Ultimate Dichotomy. It's a dichotomy of leadership. And it talks about the balance that we as leaders have to have. You can love those you lead, but there is a balance. Right? We've given a great example of how my dad loved those who he led, but there's a balance that you pull to that. In the ultimate dichotomy, Leif Babbitt and Jocko Willink are talking about their experience as SEAL commanders and the balance they had to have of loving their troops enough to send them into battle to die. Do you love somebody enough that you could still send them into battle? And can you balance the two? Oftentimes, if you love somebody, you don't want to put them in harm's way. But you also have to serve the mission. You know that without the mission, everything is lost. And so you have to be able to balance the two. Loving those you lead and balance that against the success of the mission. All right. Sometimes you have to love them enough to let them go. You have to love them out the door. I think we all have some of those people in the organization that we look at and we say, you know what, they're a great person, but they don't fit with the mission of the company, or they're not on board with where we're going strategically. Sometimes you have to love them enough to mentor them. We heard that saying in the fireside chat. We feel like we're training technicians for their next job, and sometimes that's okay. Talking to one of my people, he talked about one of the best bosses he ever had. Sat him down and says, "Well, what do you want to do?" And he says, "Well, I want to go work for this company." He says, "Well, then go do it." Would you be able to do that with somebody, with one of your direct reports? Love them enough to mentor them out the door? You got to love those you lead. Don't be so cold as to be uncaring. This is the balance, is that if you're too cold and you put the mission ahead of everything else, you'll become uncaring and you won't care about the people or the means that it takes to get it, and you'll have a high body count. You have to balance the two. You have to love those you lead, but make sure that it doesn't come at the cost of the mission. Right? Don't tolerate bad behavior. Don't sacrifice the mission for the sake of one employee or 10 employees. You have to make sure that you're holding the line and achieving success. All right, one of your other roles as a leader, you need to set the vision. You need to come out and tell people where you're going, right? Randy talked a lot about knowing where you're going, right? Setting the vision. They went down, they cut the nets. Why? Because he wanted to set the vision in their head, right? He wanted them to have a vision. Every time they did a practice, every time that they shot hoops, every time they ran sprints, he wanted them to remember cutting down those nets because that's what they were working towards, right? You have to be able to communicate that vision of where you want to go. You have to be able to explain the rules, explain what you want to do, explain where you're trying to get to. Right? How many of you know where you want to get to? It's probably the first step. It was the first step I had to take as a leader, and it took me a long time to get there, and I still don't know that I have it right. Right? But in order to communicate that vision, you have to create that vision. You have to know what that vision is and then communicate it to your team as clearly as possible. Once you've got that vision set, unite that team around the common goals. Right? Establish your purpose. We've talked about starting with your why. You need to find that why. You need to make sure that everybody else is on board with that why, or that they know how their why ties to your why. Right? Get your mission set. Establish the values. These are the ground rules. These are the common things that we're going to talk about, and this is how we're going to do it. Right? The mission is what we're trying to achieve, the objective. Purpose is why we're trying to do it. The values is how we're going to do it. Right? It shapes the culture of your organization. As a leader, it's your job to set all three of these. You don't have to do it alone, but it is your job, your responsibility to make sure that it is done. And then, in communicating it to your team, you have to repeat it 21 times. Has anybody ever communicated something to somebody and they got it right the first time? Maybe occasionally, if you're lucky. Right? Lightning does strike every once in a while. But you have to repeat yourself. And you have to keep repeating yourself until they get it. Right? One of the challenges that I give to my staff is with our mission statement, with our values, is I want them memorized. Right? If you walk up to my staff, some of them, hopefully all of them, would be able to tell you what our mission is. Team, what's our mission? We repeat it every staff meeting, right? We talk about this over and over again. All right. Next thing is that it's bigger than you. You got to recognize that what you're doing in your job, it's bigger than you. It affects more than just yourself and your paycheck and everything going on at home. It's bigger than you. It has to become bigger than you. Otherwise, why are you doing it? Right? You have to find that why. You have to find that thing that you're doing it for. Right? I talk about your goals. They need to have a deeper meaning. You really do need to understand that why. One of the things when you make sure that you're setting those goals is that they focus on the results and the outcomes, not necessarily the activities themselves, because the results and the outcomes are what matter, not necessarily how long it took to get there, not necessarily how you got there. Right? You're all here in Orlando. Every one of you took a different flight path, right? Every one of you took a different time to get here. It wasn't how much time you took to get here that mattered. It was the fact that you are here. You focus on the outcome. Make sure you're following that SMART principle, right? We want to make sure that we're specific, that goals are measurable, that they're achievable, thank you, that they're relevant, and that they're timely, right? I think everybody switches the R for something else, but I like relevant, because it makes sure that it ties to the overall mission of the company. Speaking of being bigger than us, I'm going to shift a little bit. Any questions on those leadership lessons at all before I make my shift? All right. We're still learning. There's still going to be more lessons. These are just a few that I've picked up over the years, and I know that in the next year I'm going to have another 5, and hopefully no critical mistakes, but I know there's going to be some. But it's okay, because as I fail, I learn. Right? So one of the things that we realize is that in our objectives and trying to make our company goals bigger than just what we're trying to do here, is that we really needed to look outwards. For the last several years, we've been looking internally. What are internal goals that we want to achieve? Really, we want to look outwards. And so we're kind of redoing how we measure our success. It's not in revenue. Most companies are looking at what? P&L statements. You're looking at how well did you do against your budget. In a privately held company, so there's a lot of financial metrics. We're looking at client retention. We're looking at a lot of that stuff. But we're redefining how we measure that success because it's bigger than us. It's not just about those numbers. It's about something more. I said this in the beginning, but ultimately it's always been about you. It's always been about your success and about how you are doing your jobs. And so as part of us redefining our objectives, we want to help you achieve your goals. In order for us to do that, we kind of need to know what those goals are, and we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what your vision is, that we have a clear picture of where you're going. All right, so what are your 2019 objectives? What I want you to do right now, take a minute, I'll give you about 60 seconds. Just think about what is it that you want to achieve in 2019. If you're an overachiever and you already have this, then perfect. Just 60 seconds, think about what you want to achieve in 2019. What I want you to do is put them into your phone, put them into an email, and then if you could, I'd love for you to email those to me. I'd love to know what are your goals, how are you going to measure success in the year 2019. Hopefully there's definitely not 151 people here today. I think Disney might have claimed some victims. All right, but what are your 1 to 2 goals? I would love to hear that from you. Email them to me personally if you'd like. You're welcome to throw them up on the feedback form if you want to do that as well, under the general discussion forum. But write them down, put them into your smartphone, and send me an email. If you don't want to know my email, it's my name, Josh Turley, all one word, at rtafleet.com. All right. Now, you've got your goals of what you want to achieve this year. I want you to open your eyes a little bit wider. Where do you want to be in 3 years? What are some things that you want to say in 3 years, we've achieved this? We have achieved this milestone in our fleet. We've achieved this milestone in our shop operations. 3 years, what's something really cool that you want to say you've been able to do? What's your client success story, like Jan highlighted earlier this year? Right? This should be a big goal. This should be a dream. You know, Jeff taught us to follow our dreams. Somebody said to me, I realized I stopped dreaming. I kind of I've done everything that I wanted to do, and I stopped dreaming, right? What are your dreams? What would you say in your job is like, wow, that would be really cool if I was able to do this in 3 years, right? And this should be a big goal. This shouldn't be something that you can just achieve in a year. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some time, some effort, some energy and investment. And then the real question is what has to change to make that true? What has to change to make that goal possible? What do you need to stop doing? What do you need to start doing? And what do you need to keep doing? Right? What do you need to start, stop, and keep doing? Write those things down. Because there's no way you're going to hit that 3-year dream if you don't make a change, if you don't get off that bench and step into the forest and go do what you need to do, right? It's dark and it's scary out there, but you have to do it. You have to make a change. You have to stop doing something, keep doing something, or start doing something. Right? All right, so our objectives. So these are some of the ideas that we had over the next 2 to 3 years, things that we could help you with. Hopefully, I'm on the right track. One of the things that we'd really love to see is to be able to get 500 of our fleets. Right now, we've got about 1,100 clients, just under 1,100 clients. I would love to get over half of you to that 50% PM mark. Now, Steve talked about an 80% PM mark, but I'd be curious, how many people think they run about 50% PM repair cost right now? Okay, so I have 6 out of a room of about 80. I would love if I could have 40 hands up in the next 3 years, right? I think we're going to focus on that 50% mark first. Maybe one day, 3 years from now, we can get to 80%. But we'll focus on 50% right now. I would love to say that we've been able to save 500 fleets to get $100,000 in warranty savings. How many people are already generating $100,000 in warranty savings? How many people have the potential of $100,000 in warranty savings? I don't even know if that's realistic. How much could you save in warranties? If you started doing warranties, shout out a number. What's something you could shave? $30,000. $120,000. You're already doing $120,000. Are you leaving anything on the table? All right. What's that number? All right. Another number. I saw a hand over here. All right. You're being shy. Another hand over here. Yeah. 44,000. All right. Yeah. $300,000 in warranty, okay? My goal is to figure out what that number is and then help everybody get to that number or past it. Right? And so this is why we need a little bit of help. We need to know what is that number supposed to be and how can we help you get there. I know how to help you get there, but I want to make sure that we're aligned with you, that what your goals are the same goals that I'm using to define success. Because, again, it's always been about you. All right. Another goal that I thought would be awesome would be if we could help 500 fleets reduce their cost by 10%. Right? Steve gave us a bunch of options on ways that we could measure that cost and manage that cost. How could we help you save 10%? Right? Is 10% even reasonable? And it's okay if it's not, because I'm dreaming right now, right? Could you dream of a day where you were able to lower your cost by 10%? You could save that $100 million of UPS money, right? Are there other ideas out there? I'll open it up. Any other ideas? What were some of the things you thought of when I gave you that minute, or that to think about what do you want to do in 3 years? Increase efficiency, all right? So you're talking about mechanic efficiency, and increase them from 40% to maybe 80%, maybe double mechanic efficiency, okay? Yeah. So reduce your inventory. All right, so I'm going to say increase our inventory turns, right? Because we want to turn that inventory quicker, and decrease the number of emergency, like stockouts, right? Okay. All right, so decrease stockouts and increase our turnover ratio. I like it. Others? Jan taught a great class on barcoding, by the way. All right, any others? Those sound like worthwhile goals? Are those some things that we should look at? Or those things that if we help you get to that goal, is that something that you could look back on and say, plant that flag on the mountain and say, I did it? Right? At the end of 3 years, you could hang your hat on that. Because that's ultimately what this is about. This isn't about us. It's not about us. What we're trying to do is help you put your hat on something so that you could say at the end of the day that I did it. Me and my team did it. Right? We achieved leading fleet. We achieved these things that were hard. We went out and did the impossible, right? Like JFK talks about, we choose not to do the easy things, but we choose to do the things that are hard. Right? We choose the moon. What's your moonshot? All right. Again, write down which one of these you'd like to achieve in the next 2 to 3 years. You've given us some good feedback here, and I think we're going to kind of run with that a little bit. Other ideas that Steve kind of mentioned this morning, talked about getting our direct labor time up, getting that up over 70%. How many people think they're up over 70% right now? 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. How many people think that their standard repair times, I think this goes to what Tiffany talked about with the efficiency, that they're within 90 to 100% of the standard repair time, right? How many have vehicle equivalent use? How many are even measuring VEUs, right? How would you like to get to that where you can measure your VEUs and get your cost underneath $1,800 per vehicle equivalent? All right, some other metrics that he threw up here. Our productivity rates, direct labor, standard labor time, our comeback rate, being able to measure our comeback rate in RTA. Are you guys measuring comeback rates in RTA right now? Because I don't know of a way to do that right out of the gate. You have to kind of work around that one. You flag it as rework, you use that like a reason code or something? Okay. But how do you know that it's rework? All right, so you're going back and looking at history and figuring that out? Yeah. And then you immediately flag it, all right? All right. What if you don't get to talk to the operator? You know, how do you do that? So those are things that I'm going to look at, and how do we help you reduce rework? All right. Turnover rate, he talks about 4 to 8 per year. Oh, there is more stuff. Sorry, you're all taking pictures of these slides. I'll provide these slides later. Don't you worry. You can get your pictures. How many people are running turnovers between 4 and 8 a year? How many are between 2 and 4? Above 8? Is anybody above 8? 8 turns per year in their inventory? Or about 1 turn per year, maybe? Nobody's raising their hands. You guys just keep your inventory. You don't even use it. You don't know it. How many people don't know what their inventory turnover ratio is? All right. So you don't even know if it's a problem. All right. I'd love to find out. You guys go back home and start running some of these metrics. You know, I thought a lot of those were really interesting, and I know a lot of those you can get right out of the system. But, so with that in mind, with kind of continuing a little bit, how am I doing on time? 3 minutes, perfect. I'm going to burn through these last couple here, but I wanted to hit on this last one at least. How many of you have enjoyed the Connect part of Connect? Have enjoyed coming and talking to your peers? All right. I think it's easily probably the most valuable thing that you get out of this. You know, the training's great and everything else, but the best conversations are the ones that happened out here at the round tables, that happened at lunch. And I think it's the best reason to come to Connect. The idea of that, though, is that how often do we do Connect? Once a year, right? Once a year, you get 150 people together, and it's tough to have that network only happen once a year. So I had this idea about a fleet mind group, kind of a fleet gathering of the fleet minds. I say group, I really mean groups, plural. And so we're researching this idea of establishing this kind of virtual user meeting where we have about 5 to 8 of you assigned in a group, and either once a month or once every couple months, we come together, we meet virtually on a conference call, webcam or not, depends on what you want to do there, either by industry, by role, by size. We can bring you together, we can diversify. We got a blank slate right here, I'm dreaming, right? And the idea would be is that we come together and we tackle each other's problems. You know, you sit out here just like you do these round tables, and we're able to do that and continue the conversation so it doesn't have to die here, it doesn't have to stop here at Connect and wait until next year, right? That we can keep that going. How many people would be interested in participating in a monthly or bi-monthly call like that? All right. You wouldn't be left alone. You'd have one of the RTA staff with you as a facilitator. It might even be somebody who's been there in your shoes. We're kind of looking at all those things. But if you have any feedback on that at all, I would love to hear it. I'd love to hear, you know, how, if you'd like to participate in that, put that in the feedback on the mobile app. If you're interested, again, you can shoot me an email, joshturley@rtafleet.com. Right. Again, the focus would kind of be a 3-parter. We'd help you set clear goals. What are the goals that you're working on over the next year? And what are you going to do this quarter? And what are you going to do this month to achieve those things? Then we use the second part of the call to dive into those peer resources, help provide some perspective. What's a challenge you're facing today? And see if anybody else has ideas on how to tackle that challenge. And then lastly is to hold you accountable, you know, and say, hey, Rich, you said last month that you were going to go and find out what your turnover ratio is. Did you do that? Yes or no? And in front of the other 5 to 8 people, you have to come clean. I did not do that, right? Worst part about setting goals is if you write them down, right? He talked about how, Randy talked about that this morning, is that if you write down your goals, it helps you achieve them. But then what do you need? You need somebody to hold you accountable, right? Having that partner there who's not going to judge you, but he's going to say, I know you can do better. How can we help you? Right? He's going to give you the and one. So the idea is to help hold you accountable and help you achieve more than you could do by yourself. Together we can go farther than we can go alone, right? Next thing that I'm talking about doing, and I'm curious to see how many people are interested in this, is a one-day Connect event where we do single-track Keynote style, pretty much like this, with a camera and a group, maybe about this size. But it'd be a one-day event, probably out of our office in Glendale, focus on 4 to 5 topics. We have about seating for 30 or 40. But I really want to explore this potential for live streaming. How many people would be interested in either attending in Phoenix or watching a live stream? All right. How many people would be interested in showing up in Phoenix? Just curious. All right. All right. We'll see how it goes. Hotels are cheaper, so it'll probably be around September, October, so the hotels will be dirt cheap. August would be really cheap, maybe $70 a night, but I'm not going to punish those of you who want to fly in. August is miserable. A really nice pool, but then if you're at the pool, you're not at RTA, so I don't know. All right, so September, October time frame, and then that's the other thing is that we're still kind of looking at the cost for that. How much would you pay for something like that? Just throw out a number. You pay $1. $1 of that, man. Do I have two? I have two going once, going twice. It's sold. Thanks you, Larry. I think you're going to be one of my instructors. All right. $50, $100. How much would you come out and do it one day? How much, or it come on the live stream? How many would prefer doing the live stream versus being in person? Live stream over in person. There's no travel involved in live stream, so you got that going. And that's the idea that we're looking at with live stream, is that one of the biggest challenges to connecting with everybody is travel. It's travel and getting that face-to-face. I love the face-to-face. I love being able to see you, but I know that travel is a huge hurdle that people have trouble overcoming. So I'm grinding on that one. Angie and several people can tell you that I've been really thinking about this and trying to figure out how to outgrow the travel box that we're kind of in. All right, so quick announcements. RTA Connect 2020. We are going to be celebrating our 30th annual users conference next year. It's kind of odd that we didn't quite get this year's the 40th anniversary of the company. It took Dad 9 years to get that first conference going. So next year is going to be the 30th annual conference. It is going to be in Las Vegas. I'm still working on hotel contracts, so that's not been set yet. I do know it's going to be one of 2 hotels, and that the cost is going to be at most $110 plus tax per night. I'm really trying to get that down another $5 to $10. $110 plus tax per night. Full price, I'll be sending out these slides so you don't have to take pictures of them, but full price will be $13.45 for the 5-day pass. The 3-day pass will be $10.95. This is full price. So this is if you're a procrastinator and you wait until February to register. This is your stupid tax, is what we call it. All right. Again, we're going to offer the same 10% early bird discount through January 31st like we do every year, as well as we're going to do the 5% group discount. So if you have a group of 3 or more, how many people came with 3 or more people this year? All right, I love it, because you get more out of conference than if you just send one person by sending a team. How many people, just curious of those who brought more than 3 people, do you meet with your team after the classes and discuss the things that you learned? You get so much more out of conference if you can do that. I do that with my team. We watch a 1-day live stream with another company, and we digest that afterwards. We talk for, probably an hour. And the best parts, it's not the live stream. The live stream's good. But Doug, I think you said it best, is that the best part of those events is that hour afterwards where we talk about it, because it's given us ideas and it's inspired us to do things. And so I'm hoping is that our Connect one day is the same way, and that 2020 will be the same thing. Bring your groups, bring your people. All right. And then lastly, we are going to offer that die hard. You are committed to coming to the conference. You don't even care what's on the agenda. That'll be a 20% off before October 1st. So starting through September 30th, you'll have that full 20% at your disposal. All right. So again, if you wait until February, you're going to pay a pretty hefty, I want to say it comes out to about $300, $400 stupid tax. Right? So don't wait until February. Any questions on Conference Connect 2019 or 2020? All right. If you're looking for your emails, there's going to be a lot of emails coming out about that. Tomorrow, we do have a Q&A, open mic, town hall. You'll have a few of us up here on the stage, so come prepared with some questions. If you have questions you haven't gotten answered yet, that you want to open up to the forum, that you want to open up to anybody, or if you have specific questions for me or for the team, come prepared for that. Be kind of an open mic town hall session in the morning. We do have several more breakouts. How many people are flying out early morning tomorrow? All right, not many of you. Okay. So we do have several more breakouts. And that's it. I am done. You are free to go and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much. You guys are amazing.